The rain hadn't stopped all evening. It drummed softly against the hotel window, washing the glow of the city into streaks of gold and gray. Inside, everything was still, too still for the night before a wedding. The room smelled of roses and steam. Her dress hung near the bed, untouched, wrapped in white silk that shimmered every time the light from the street flickered. The sight of it made her heart tighten. It should have felt magical. Instead, it felt heavy, like something borrowed, not chosen. She walked across the carpet barefoot, holding a glass of water that had long since gone warm. The air was thick, not with heat, but with noise, a kind of invisible pressure in her chest that wouldn't leave. The phone on the desk kept lighting up, messages from friends, her sister, her fiancé. "Can't wait for tomorrow," one said. "You must be so excited." Excited. That word didn't feel right anymore. She set the phone face down and went to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked calm, perfect even, hair tied, eyes lined just enough, the picture of someone who had everything figured out. But beneath that calm, there was a storm. Every reflection in that mirror held a version of her that didn't make it to this moment. The one who laughed easily, who believed love stayed simple. The one who once loved a man who never stopped feeling like home. Her breath caught when she thought of him. Ethan. It had been years, but memories had their own kind of gravity, pulling you back when you least expected. She told herself she'd let go. She told herself she'd moved on. But then, out of nowhere, she'd seen his name earlier that day, in a random comment on a mutual friend's post. Just a name. That was all it took. Now, with the city humming below and her wedding dress hanging beside her, she couldn't stop thinking about the last time they'd spoken. The fight. The silence. The way he'd said her name, like it still meant something. The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the skyline. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hand resting against the phone, unsure if she wanted it to ring or stay silent forever. And then it vibrated once. A message. Her heart skipped before her eyes even moved. "Ethan, I heard you're getting married. Congratulations." For a long moment, she didn't breathe. Every instinct told her to ignore it. To close her eyes, turn off the light, and sleep. But instead, her fingers typed before she could stop them. "Thank you." Then, after a pause. "How have you been?" The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. And in that quiet, something inside her shifted, something she thought was long gone, but had only been waiting for the right storm to wake it up. The rain eased into a steady whisper, tracing silver lines down the glass. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, phone in hand, the glow from the screen washing her face in pale light. The city outside blurred into a rhythm that matched her pulse. She hadn't expected him to reply. Not after all these years. Not tonight. But the phone buzzed again. "Ethan, I'd been fine. Still in the city. Didn't think I'd hear from you again." She stared at the words for a while, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. Every sentence she thought of felt wrong, too much or not enough. Finally she typed, "It's strange, isn't it? How people disappear and still stay somewhere inside you." She pressed send before she could change her mind. The 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared again. Vanished again. She could almost see him, sitting somewhere in his apartment, the same way he used to think before speaking. That quiet patience she'd always loved. Then his reply came. "Yeah. Some ghosts don't know they're supposed to leave." Her breath caught. She smiled, though she didn't mean to. The conversation kept going, light at first, safe. They talked about work, about the rain, about how the city still looked the same even when everything else had changed. But under every line, there was a pull, familiar, slow, undeniable. "You still writing?" he asked. "Sometimes," she answered. "Mostly in my head. You were always better with words you didn't say." She laughed quietly, and the sound startled her, it had been so long since it came out that naturally. Hours slipped away unnoticed. When she finally looked at the clock, it was nearly midnight. Tomorrow she was supposed to walk down an aisle, say I do, start a new life. But right now, she was sitting on a hotel floor, talking to a man she once promised herself she'd never think about again. The phone buzzed one last time that night. "Ethan, I'd like to see you. Just to talk. For old time's sake." Her thumb hovered above the screen. The sound of rain grew louder again, soft, insistent, familiar. She typed slowly. "Just to talk." And hit send. The clock on the nightstand blinked past midnight. The city had quieted, only the sound of rain remained, sliding down the windows in soft streaks. She sat on the bed, phone in hand, staring at his last message. "I'd like to see you." For a long time, she didn't move. She read those words again and again, as if they might change meaning the more she looked. Then the screen lit up. "Ethan is calling." Her heart stopped for a second. She let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then she answered. "Hey," his voice came through, lower, calmer than she remembered. "Hi," she said softly. The word barely made a sound. Neither of them spoke for a moment. There was only the quiet, the kind of silence that used to feel like home. "I didn't think you'd actually reply," he said finally. "I didn't think you'd still sound the same." He laughed quietly. "Guess some things don't change." She smiled despite herself, leaning against the headboard. "You still in the same apartment?" "Yeah. The one with the broken heater and the view I never fixed." She could almost see it, the worn-out sofa, the empty bottles by the window, the way his room always smelled like coffee and rain. They talked for a while, about nothing, about everything. The conversation moved like it used to, slow, natural, filled with pauses that didn't need to be filled. But then he said it. "You sound different." "How so?" "Quieter. Like you're somewhere else, even when you're here." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because he was right. The rain hit harder against the glass, thunder rolling somewhere far away. "I don't know why I called," he said finally. I know," she interrupted gently. "I know." There was a breath between them, heavy, careful, full of the things they weren't saying. "I'd still like to see you," he said again, softer this time. She looked toward the wedding dress hanging in the corner. The fabric shimmered faintly in the dim light, a quiet reminder of everything she was supposed to be tomorrow. "Just for a little while," he added. "We don't have to talk about the past." She hesitated. The words felt dangerous, like a step toward a door she'd promised never to open again. But her voice betrayed her. "Where?" He paused, not surprised, just waiting. "There's a cafe still open near the bridge." "Do you remember it?" "I remember everything," she whispered. The line went quiet again. "Half an hour?" he asked. "Half an hour," she said. When the call ended, she sat there for a while, the city reflected in her eyes, 1,000 stories moving at once, and hers about to start again where it should have ended. She stood, found her coat, and caught her reflection in the mirror. For the first time that night, she didn't look like a bride. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time she stepped out of the hotel. The streets shimmered, puddles catching the reflection of streetlights, car headlights slicing through the fog. The air smelled like coffee and asphalt, the kind of scent that only comes after a storm. She pulled her coat tighter around her and started walking. Every step echoed louder than it should have. The cafe wasn't far, just across the bridge, down the street lined with bookstores that were already closed. When she pushed the door open, a small bell rang. Warm light spilled over her face, soft and golden, a quiet refuge from the wet night outside. The place looked almost the same, old wooden chairs, a fogged-up window, and the same song playing faintly from the corner speaker. And then she saw him. Ethan sat at a table near the back, a cup of coffee in front of him, steam curling into the air. He looked up, and the moment their eyes met, the rest of the cafe disappeared. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled, not the kind you give to strangers, but the one that remembers. "You came," he said quietly. "You asked," she replied. She sat across from him. The table between them suddenly felt too small. His hair was a little shorter, his jaw more defined, but the same softness lingered in his eyes. The same calm that used to make her forget where she was. They talked about nothing at first. About the rain, about how the city never really sleeps. About work, about mutual friends they hadn't seen in years. But every word was a thread, thin, fragile, pulling them back to a place neither of them had meant to return to. At one point, she laughed, genuinely, freely. It startled her. He looked up at her with that familiar half-smile. "I missed that sound," he said. Her smile faded, but she didn't look away. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" "Make this harder than it already is." He nodded slowly, but the way he looked at her didn't change. Outside, a bus passed, spraying light through the window, and for a moment they were both just silhouettes, two people sitting in the quiet warmth of something that shouldn't exist anymore. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked suddenly. "About what?" "Us." The word hung between them, fragile, heavy. She took a slow breath. "Not anymore," she lied. He smiled faintly. "You were always a bad liar." The air thickened with things unspoken. The hum of the refrigerator, the clink of a spoon, everything else felt too loud. Her hand brushed the edge of her cup, then his. Neither of them moved away. When she finally glanced at the clock, it was nearly 1 a.m. She stood up. "I should go," she said softly. He nodded, but didn't stand. Then, quietly, "Can I walk you back?" She hesitated. "It's late." "That's why," he said. And somehow, without deciding, she said, "Okay." They stepped back into the night, the city glowing faintly beneath the drizzle. The cafe door closed behind them, and with it, the version of themselves that had tried to pretend nothing was happening. The rain had almost stopped. Only a few drops still fell, tapping softly against the pavement like an echo of the storm. The streets were quiet now, emptied by the hour, painted in reflections of yellow streetlights and passing cars. They walked side by side without umbrellas. The city shimmered around them, alive but distant, as if the world had decided to look away for a while. Ethan's hands were tucked into his coat pockets. She crossed her arms, holding her jacket closed against the wind. Every few steps, their shoulders brushed, small, unintentional, electric. Neither of them said much at first. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried history, full of words that had already been said, and some that had never needed to be. He looked over at her once, his expression soft, almost careful. "You look the same," he said quietly. "Just, calmer." She smiled faintly. "You don't." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "Guess time wasn't as kind to me." "It was," she said, and for a moment, the truth in her voice startled them both. They reached the bridge. The air there smelled of river water and rain, clean, sharp, familiar. She leaned against the railing, watching the ripples below shimmer under the lights. "I thought I'd forgotten this," she said softly. "Forgotten what?" "How easy it was to talk to you." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, not close enough to touch, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. "You ever wonder," he said slowly, "if we just met at the wrong time?" She turned to look at him, but the question hung there, too heavy to answer. The wind lifted her hair, and he reached up as if to brush it back, then stopped, his hand frozen in midair. For a second, everything else fell away, the city, the noise, the years between them. Only that space between two people who once knew each other too well. Then she stepped back. "I should go," she said quietly. He nodded, eyes lowered. "Yeah. You should." They stood there for a few more seconds, not moving, both pretending to wait for something that wasn't coming. Then she turned, started walking. He followed a few steps behind, not too close, not too far. The rain began again, soft, thin, almost like forgiveness. When they reached the hotel, she turned toward him, and for the first time that night, she smiled, tired, sad, real. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night," he said. As she stepped inside, the door closed behind her with a quiet click. And out on the street, the rain kept falling, steady, endless, washing the city clean, though some things could never be washed away. The first light of morning crept through the thin hotel curtains, painting long lines across the room. Dust floated lazily in the air, catching the sunlight like tiny pieces of time refusing to move on. For a few seconds, she didn't know where she was. The sheets were soft, unfamiliar. The air smelled like rain and something else, something warm, quiet, human. Then she turned her head, and it all came rushing back. Ethan was there. Lying beside her, half covered, his face turned toward the window, asleep. The sight of him felt both foreign and painfully familiar, the shape of his shoulders, the curve of his hand resting on the edge of the blanket. Her breath caught, not because of shock, but because of how natural it felt. How easy it was to be near him again. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling slightly around her, and the room came into focus, the faint smell of coffee from the night before, a chair pushed out of place, the faint reflection of city lights still fading on the wet glass. Nothing chaotic. Just real. The kind of stillness that happens right after something irreversible. Her phone was on the table, its screen glowing faintly with missed calls, unread messages. "Where are you? Are you okay? Everyone's asking about you." She didn't touch it. It didn't belong to this version of the morning. For a while, she just sat there, listening to the slow rhythm of Ethan's breathing. He looked peaceful, unaware of the storm quietly breaking inside her. Her hand brushed against the edge of the bed, tracing invisible lines across the sheets, as if trying to memorize the moment, to hold it somewhere no one could find. She stood and walked to the window. The city outside was waking up, cars moving through puddles, a man in a suit running with a newspaper over his head, the sound of life resuming its rhythm. It felt cruel somehow, that the world could keep going like nothing had changed. Her reflection in the glass looked different. There was no guilt on her face, not yet. Just a strange calm, the kind that comes right before you realize what you've done. Behind her, Ethan stirred slightly, murmuring something half asleep. She turned, watched him for a moment longer, then whispered, "You should sleep." He didn't answer, but his breathing steadied again. She glanced at the clock, 7:18 a.m. The morning of her wedding day. The thought hit her slowly, like a wave reaching the shore long after the storm has passed. In a few hours, she'd walk down an aisle, take someone else's hand, and promise forever. But forever had already changed. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself. It was just one night. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The hotel suite was no longer quiet. Voices filled the air, laughter, footsteps, the hiss of a curling iron, someone calling her name from the other room. It was morning now, the wedding morning, and everyone around her seemed to move with a purpose. But she couldn't feel any of it. She sat by the mirror, the same one she'd stared into the night before, only now it reflected a stranger. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her skin glowing under the soft makeup lights. The woman in the reflection smiled on cue, nodded when spoken to, laughed when expected. But her eyes told another story. Behind her, the bridesmaids were buzzing with energy, dresses rustling, phones ringing, champagne glasses clinking. Someone said, "You're glowing." She smiled at the compliment, though inside she felt hollow, not empty, but too full of things she couldn't say. When her makeup artist stepped away for a moment, she reached for her phone on the table. There were 31 unread messages. One from her fiancé, "Can't wait to see you. I love you." And one, at the very bottom, from Ethan. No words, just a single dot. She stared at it for a long time. Then she locked the screen and placed the phone face down. Someone came up behind her and fixed the veil. You ready? She nodded. Almost. The word felt heavy in her mouth, like a secret trying to hide itself in plain sight. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, casting soft light across the carpet. It should have felt like a sign, a new beginning. Instead, it felt like too much light on something that didn't want to be seen. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and tried to remember the feeling she was supposed to have today: joy, excitement, love. But the only thing she could hear was the sound of silence between two heartbeats that had once moved in sync. Someone called her name again, louder this time. She stood up, fixed her dress, and forced another smile. And as she walked toward the door, toward the ceremony waiting for her downstairs, she realized she'd never really left that room from last night. The chapel was bathed in light. White flowers lined the aisle, the scent of lilies and roses thick in the air. Soft music played, a piano melody that felt almost too gentle for how fast her heart was beating. Everyone stood when she entered. A sea of faces turned toward her, smiling, holding up phones, whispering words she couldn't hear. She tried to focus on breathing, one step, then another. The dress felt heavier now, the veil brushing against her shoulders like a quiet reminder of everything she was supposed to be. At the end of the aisle, he was waiting. Her groom. His smile was warm, certain, steady, the kind of smile that should have made her feel safe. And for a moment, she wanted to believe it did. She took his hands in hers. They were firm, familiar, real. But in the back of her mind, another image flickered, a different pair of hands, the faint smell of rain, the sound of a voice saying her name in the dark. "Do you, Emily, take this man?" The words blurred. She could hear them, but they didn't land. It was like standing inside a movie, watching someone else play her part. Her lips parted. "I do." The sound of applause filled the room. She smiled, wide enough for the cameras, soft enough for the guests. But her eyes, for just a moment, drifted toward the tall windows at the side of the chapel. Outside, the city shimmered in sunlight, the same streets that had been wet with rain only hours before. And for a heartbeat, a single, quiet heartbeat, she thought she saw him out there. Not clearly, not close. Just a figure in the light, still, watching. She blinked, and he was gone. The ceremony went on. Rings, kisses, laughter, the kind of beauty that looks perfect in photos. But beneath it all, she felt something break quietly, something small and permanent. When everyone cheered, she laughed too. It sounded right. But it didn't feel like her voice anymore. The sound of laughter filled the ballroom, crystal glasses clinking, the hum of music, the buzz of voices blending into a kind of cheerful blur. The lights were warm and golden, reflecting off chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. Everything shimmered, the tables, the wine, her smile. She sat beside her new husband, smiling for photos, thanking guests, listening to toasts she barely heard. Every compliment landed like a pebble dropped into deep water, making ripples, but never reaching her. When he leaned over and whispered, "You look beautiful," she smiled back automatically. "Thank you." Her voice sounded calm, practiced, the kind of tone you use when everything is exactly as it should be. But the moment he turned to speak to someone else, her smile faded. She looked down at her hands, the new ring shining under the light, and wondered how something so small could suddenly feel so heavy. People laughed, danced, clapped. The DJ played a love song, one she used to listen to years ago, when love had felt simpler, quieter. Her chest tightened. She stood up quietly, stepping away from the table, pretending to fix her dress as she walked toward the terrace. Outside, the night air hit her skin, cool, steady, real. She exhaled for the first time in hours. The city stretched below, alive with light and sound. She rested her hands on the railing, letting the wind play with the edges of her veil. The laughter behind her felt miles away. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated before looking, maybe another photo, another message from a guest. But it wasn't. It was him. "Ethan, I didn't mean to ruin your day. I just, Needed to see that you were really gone. She stared at the screen. The noise from the ballroom muffled into nothing, just music, laughter, the faint echo of a song she no longer recognized. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she typed back, fingers trembling slightly. You didn't ruin anything. A pause. You just reminded me what real feels like. She pressed send, locked the phone, and set it down on the railing beside her. The city below kept moving, cars, lights, people. Everything still turning. But for her, time had stopped somewhere between last night and this one. By the time they got home, the world had already gone quiet again. The city lights blurred past the car windows, fading into the soft darkness of midnight. Her husband's hand rested lightly over hers on the seat, warm, steady, sure, but she didn't feel it. She kept her eyes on the passing streets, counting the traffic lights like seconds. When they reached the apartment, he carried in the flowers, the leftover cake, the folded suit jacket. She stood in the doorway for a while, still in her wedding dress, staring at the faint glow of their living room. Everything looked the same. That was the strangest part. He turned, smiled at her, and said softly, "We did it." She nodded. "Yeah, we did." Then he kissed her forehead and went to the kitchen to pour water into a vase. She walked toward the window. The city stretched below, the same skyline she'd seen so many times, but tonight it looked distant, almost unreal. Her reflection stared back at her, still in white, still wearing the smile she had perfected all day. She reached up, unclipped the veil, and let it fall to the floor. The sound was almost nothing, just a whisper of fabric. But in that silence, it felt enormous. The apartment smelled faintly of flowers and candle wax. On the coffee table lay a pile of cards, one of them already opened, wishing you forever happiness. Her eyes lingered on the word forever. In the other room, she heard him humming, quietly, off-key, the sound of someone content. It should have been comforting. It only made her chest tighten. She turned on her phone. One new message. "Ethan, did you say yes?" Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she typed back, slowly, each word deliberate. "Yes." For a moment, she almost left it there. But after a breath, she added. "But not the way you think." She pressed send, then turned the phone face down again. The apartment was still. The air heavy. The sound of her husband moving around somewhere in the background faded into nothing. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her dress pooling around her, and for the first time all night, she let herself stop pretending. There was no music, no applause, no audience, just the quiet truth of what she'd done and the slow, painful peace of knowing she could never undo it. It had been 3 days since the wedding. The flowers on the table had begun to wilt, their petals curling inward like they were keeping a secret. The champagne glasses still sat in the sink, untouched. Life was supposed to move on, the new routine, the new chapter, the perfect beginning. But it hadn't. Not yet. Her husband had left early for work that morning, his tie slightly crooked, his goodbye kiss quick and distracted. He said he'd call at lunch. She nodded, smiled, and watched the door close behind him. When the apartment finally went quiet, she stood in the middle of the room for a long time. The silence was heavy, the kind that wasn't peaceful, but full of ghosts. The phone buzzed once. A message. No name, just a number she already knew too well. She hesitated before opening it. "Ethan, I know this is the last time I should write. I just need you to read this once." There was another message after it, longer, breaking into lines. A voice trapped inside text. "I don't hate you. I never could." That night, it wasn't about the past. It was about the part of me that still believed we were real. "You don't owe me anything. I just needed to see you one last time and know you were still you. Whatever you said that morning, I believed it. And I hope you did too. Take care of yourself, M." She read it once, then again, each time slower. The words didn't hurt. They didn't even surprise her. They just settled somewhere deep, in that quiet space between guilt and love. She sat down at the table, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that felt honest, not sad, not bright, just real. For a moment, she thought about replying. Typing something small, simple, "I'm sorry." Or "thank you." But no words felt right. Everything she could say would sound like an ending, and she wasn't ready to write one yet. Instead, she opened the drawer beside her, found a piece of stationery, and began to write, not a reply, not even a letter, just something that needed to exist. I don't know what this was, a goodbye, a reminder, or a mistake that finally felt like the truth. You were never supposed to be part of my story again, and yet somehow, you still are. I don't regret seeing you. I regret everything that came before we stopped. She folded the page carefully and slipped it between the pages of a book on the shelf, the one she'd once borrowed from him years ago and never returned. A secret inside a secret. Then she stood, took a slow breath, and opened the window. The air smelled like rain again. Somewhere, in another part of the city, Ethan might have been doing the same, starting his day, drinking his coffee, pretending everything was fine. She closed her eyes and whispered his name once, not loudly, not sadly, just enough for herself. Then she went to make breakfast. Because the world didn't stop, even when hers had. The morning light was softer that day. It filled the kitchen slowly, slipping across the floor, warming the corners of the room that had felt cold for days. She sat at the table with her coffee, hands wrapped around the cup, listening to the hum of the city outside. There was nothing left to hide. Not really. Her husband had left for work an hour ago, same routine, same kiss on the cheek, same quiet promise of normal life. And for the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel like pretending anymore. She looked at her reflection in the window, pale light, tired eyes, calm face. That calm scared her more than guilt ever did. She turned on the voice recorder on her phone, hesitated for a few seconds, then began to speak, softly, as if afraid to wake the truth. "I cheated," she said. The words came out almost gentle, not as a confession but as a fact. "I thought it would destroy me, but it didn't. It just reminded me that I was still alive. I didn't do it because I stopped loving him. I did it because I stopped feeling anything at all." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept going. "It wasn't about Ethan. It wasn't even about love. It was about the part of me that wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen. To be wanted. To exist outside of someone's idea of perfection." She paused. A siren wailed faintly in the distance, then faded. "I know what I did can't be undone," she said finally. "But for one night, I stopped being the version of myself that everyone else built. And maybe that's what scared me the most." She ended the recording, stared at the phone for a long moment, then deleted it. Some truths weren't meant to be shared. They just needed to be spoken once, to exist, to breathe, to be released. Outside, the city moved on, loud and ordinary. She stood, washed her cup, opened the window wider. The air smelled clean, like something starting over. And as the wind brushed against her hair, she whispered, almost to herself. "I cheated. But not on him. On the version of me that forgot how to feel." Then she smiled, not a happy smile, not a sad one. Just real. The kind that meant the story was over.